Alright, face masks. Let's talk about them. You're wondering why I'm the only sewing person on TikTok that hasn't already done a video on face masks already. And it's a complicated issue. More complicated than I think people are given credit for. So bear with me as I do this multi-part explanation of face masks and everything you need to know about them. Now, I come from a partially scientific background. While I consider myself an artist, I did actually go to school for biology for a time. And I know a lot about fabric. This is my career. This is my living. This is what I know. So when you combine a scientific background with a fabric knowledge, you end up getting exactly what you need to know to make a face mask. Now, there are two types of face masks that we're concerned about. Ones that replace the N95 masks and ones that simply go over other masks. This one I made to replace an N95 mask. It does not replace it, but it's the best thing I could do out of what I had in my house at the time. Unfortunately, very similar to an N95 mask, it is really tough to breathe through, which is why it's effective. So I'm also going to end up making myself one that is just 2 layers of cotton and is much easier to breathe in for when I need to breathe. Anyways, I'll explain more of that in part 2. Okay, so what is the difference between a replacement mask and a mask that goes over an N95 mask? Basically, it's layers. This mask, while it looks like it's just 2 layers of cotton, is actually 2 layers of batik cotton, 1 layer of flannel, and 1 layer of a non-woven filter. All 4 layers combined to roughly, not really quite, almost make up what an N95 mask would be filtering. Now, what's the difference? That depends on fabric. So I'm going to go into kind of an explanation of how fabric is and how fabric filters. I don't often work in cotton, so this is what I've just got in my scrap pile, so bear with me here. This is a quilting cotton. This is what most of you are going to be making masks out of. This is also what I do not recommend to make masks out of. And here's why. See how you can see through it? Quilting cotton has about a 60 to 65 thread count per inch. Thread count means that if you put a square inch of this, it would be how many threads are going down and how many threads are going to the side. So a 60 thread count would mean that there are 30 threads going across and 30 threads going up and down. This is what most of you probably have in your stock. It's also probably what the fabric store is telling you to make it up and what most places are recommending. Now, if you can see through this, a virus can get through it. Viruses are teeny, tiny, like astronomically small, like much smaller than a singular cell in any part of your body. In fact, how viruses work is they get into your cells, replicate, and then burst those cells. Like they're just tiny. So if you can see through this, it's not really going to stop the virus. Why they're recommending to use this is because this will stop a water droplet, kind of. And so say somebody coughs, the water droplets in the air that aren't really water will collect on this mask instead of going into your mouth or lungs or nose. But that's all that this is going to do. Now this is a batik cotton. This is what I recommend doing. This has about 100 thread count. Notice how you cannot see through it. It is a significantly denser fabric, meaning less of a chance of something getting through. And that's all face masks are, is decreasing the chance that something is going to get through. And when you're going with something as small as a virus, that means you need a lot of layers that will stop as much as it can. Now, of course, not every fabric is going to have the exact same thread count. This is really just a general guideline, so I can really only speak in generalities here. So let's talk about fabrics that may not be quilting cotton or batik cotton that you should avoid or you should use. So we covered quilting cotton. I wouldn't use it, but if it's all you got, go for it. This is another quilting cotton. It's a little bit denser, but I can still kind of see through it, so no. This is a cotton muslin. I see a lot of people lining theirs with these. It's okay, it's not the best. In fact, muslin is actually known for having a really loose weave, so I'd rather avoid this. However, it is soft, and we'll get into that in a second. Now let's say you don't have any sewing ability, and you're just using whatever you have laying in your house. That's fine, a lot of people are going to be in that situation. Now this is your standard bandana. It's real see-through. If you have nothing else, still use this. Here's a batik bandana, which I would be shocked if you also have one of these at home. It's a little better though. Better option than that one. Now these are decorative scarves. This one's made out of a linen. This will stop nothing. This is a gauze and you might as well just breathe open air. Go through your bandana collection or other pieces of fabric, hold it up to the light. If you can't see through it, it's going to be better than nothing. Fold it in half and you've got double the protection. But if you have a sewing machine and know what you're doing, there are more options. Now flannel is definitely one I'd recommend making a mask out of. In fact, a lot of the early things I was seeing was to recommend flannel, and I haven't seen that lately and I don't know why that stopped. It passes the light check, which is weird because it has a really loose weave. You can see how loose this weave is. So why is that? Like, you can see it's a much looser weave than even the quilting cotton. So what's the difference between quilting cotton and flannel? Flannel is just cotton that's been brushed with a metal brush. It essentially rips up the fibers and makes it fluffy. That's what makes it soft, that's why we like it so much. It's also warmer because it takes air and insulates it, which means that air gets trapped in it. Now that fluffiness, that actually does fill in the holes quite well. Therefore, it is going to be much harder for something to get through this than it is this. Think of this as big open pores, and this one is nice clogged pores. Now obviously, I'm using a pair of old pajamas. I don't have flannel on hand, so I literally just took an old pair of pajamas where the elastic was worn out of and cut them up. If that's all you've got, I recommend doing that. But on that note, if you have like a cotton button-down shirt, don't use that cotton. Garment cotton has an even lower thread count than quilting cotton. And t-shirts don't do either. Anything that's got a knit has a lot of holes in it. You're better off cutting up a pillowcase. Now, you'll notice that I don't have any polyester here. Don't use a synthetic. Synthetic fibers are incredibly smooth, which means it's very easy for anything to pass through it, even if it's a fairly tight weave. So flannel works so well is because it's so fluffy, and cotton fibers, because they're natural, also have a natural fluffiness to them. But a polyester is basically virus slip and slide. Don't use a polyester or any other synthetic. Go natural. Also, natural fabrics are way more comfortable on your skin. Like, way more. And when you're going to have these on your face for so long, you're going to want that. So, what is my formula that I use? 1 layer of batik cotton, 1 layer of a flannel, and then 1 layer of a non-woven. Now, this is actually a furnace filter that I cut up. I've seen a lot of people doing this. It's a smart idea. Now, unfortunately, this is just for allergen. They do make one that supposedly stops viruses, but everything I know about science suggests that if it's tight enough to stop a virus, air is not going to get through it very easily, and it's going to wreck your furnace, so I actually don't believe that. But something's better than nothing. I'll cover this in a second. And then 1 more layer of batik cotton. And that's the sandwich that I use. This is as close as you're going to get to an N95 mask. Okay, so this is as close as you're going to get to an N95 mask, but the problem is, it is really hard to breathe through. And part of that is because it is so good at filtering that it's hard to get air through. That is how N95 masks actually are as well. Now, I have asthma, and therefore that is really bad for me. I had to go out shopping yesterday and I wore this, and I literally ripped it off the second that I could because I could barely breathe. So if you have any sort of heart issue or any sort of breathing issue, take these 2 layers out. This will not be as effective as stopping anything, but this will stop enough that it will be a significant difference than not wearing a mask at all. In fact, I'm going to be making myself one of these with just 2 layers of batik, just for more casual things like going outside. Saving that one just for shopping. But back to filters. So you can see through this one, which is why it's only 1 of 4 layers that I use. But a non-woven doesn't have as many holes in it, just by how it is made. Non-wovens are not woven, if that wasn't obvious. An actual N95 mask is nothing but non-woven material. It's just so compact that very little can get through it. So if you have one of these laying around, I do recommend trying to stick it into your mask. But if you don't have it, like if you live in an apartment, don't worry. It is just 1 extra layer. Alright, so we've got a pretty good wrap on what fabrics to use and what fabrics to not use. Now let's talk about design. So I got this offline. It's copyrighted to some jerk who's trying to copyright something that people need. I don't know. I just printed it off. You can see this comes in 3 different sizes. Now what's really irritating about this is that I did have to make my own seam allowance. This recommended a 1/4 inch. Unless you're a quilter, you should probably make it a 5/8 inch or a 1/2 inch, keeping in mind what you're going to be doing on your machine. I found a 1/4 inch actually really challenging for this, just because of how many weird shape seams there are. Now this is the curve style that makes this kind of a style. A lot of people like the accordion style, which I don't make, so I don't have one to show you. It's the one that has the pleats in it and kind of cups your face. I prefer this one because this has a better fit on your face, and most of the people I've talked to, especially ones that are going to be wearing masks underneath it, prefer this style. So this is the style I'm going to be talking about. Now you're also going to need elastic. I think they recommend 1/4 inch. This is all I have in my stock. This is what I use. It's a little thinner, but it seems to work just fine. I wouldn't go anything over 1/4 inch though, because then it just becomes very nuisance. And you're also going to want paper clips, which you're going to unfold and bend into this shape. Remember to round the edge. Alright, on cutting your fabric. You want to make sure that your grain lines are matched up, meaning that all the threads are going in the same direction. And then you want to make sure that your pattern is lined up with those grain lines. If you don't do this, you're going to end up with a mask that's not going to fit really well, because it's going to be kind of twisting and torquing on your face. As you can see, I've redone the pattern with 5/8 inch seam allowance. I just used a clear ruler, but a regular one will work. Just making sure that there's 5/8 inches all the way around the pattern. And I pin the corners, and now I cut. And there we go. Now I realize I didn't actually talk about what batik fabric is. Batik is actually not a kind of fabric, it's a dyeing process. Batik is actually a wax. Basically, they stamp wax onto cotton, and then either dye it or re-dye it, and that wax resists the next dye, so you end up with these cool kind of patterns. Now the reason why I'm recommending it is that the cotton that's usually using is a much higher density cotton. Almost twice as many threads as I mentioned before. It's not a guarantee that it's going to be a denser cotton, but it is going to be more likely, which is why I recommend it. Almost every fabric store on a planet is going to have some sort of batik in it. And for those online shopping, this is how you spell it. Now I'm going to make 6 masks. I also have lengths of 8 inches of elastic and paper clips that I've unfolded and rounded on the edge. Super important thing I forgot. Make sure to pre-wash your cottons. I'm going to do this for a multitude of reasons. One, because cottons shrink in the wash and the dry. So if somebody ends up washing their mask, they won't shrink on them if you pre-wash it. But also fabrics are covered in all sorts of awful chemicals, including formaldehyde and rat poisons and all sorts of things like that. So you want to wash them because especially if you're going to be putting it up against your face for multiple hours a day, you don't want any of that stuff near you. So make sure to wash. Really important. Alright, so I'm going to be making 12 masks, and 2 of them are going to be full filtration. Each mask needs 4 layers of cotton, and I also have 4 layers of the filth and 4 layers of the flannel for those 2. The other 10 will just be double layer cotton, and then 24 elastic and 12 paper clips. And before I get into the actual sewing of this, here's my warning. These will not protect you indefinitely. Do not get a false sense of confidence if you make one of these and wear it in public. Still avoid all public and social situations if you are able to. When you have one of these, you're going to feel a very false sense of protection, and nothing, not even an N95 mask, is 100% going to stop a virus. Okay, actual sewing. Now I'm going to be very sparingly using pins, because every pinhole can actually leave a hole that something can get in through. I've got 2 layers here, and I'm going to sew along this curved edge. Now I'm going to open it up, Press this in. Now I'm going to stitch about 1/4 of an inch from the seam to tack that seam allowance down. When you're doing this, you want to make sure that the fabric is tightly pulled, and then you get a nice flat seam on the outside. Trim close to the stitch. You don't have to do this part, but it's a nice step. Repeat everything on the second set of pieces. Look for the next part. Alright, now you've got 2 sides. Doesn't matter which one's the lining and which one's not if you're using the same fabric. Now you're going to need 2 pieces of elastic. I use 8-inch. That might be a little big for people, but I'd rather have bigger and then they can knot it to close it down. Because if they're too tight, it's going to be really uncomfortable and they're not going to want to wear a mask, and that's not useful. Alright, you pin the elastic into the corners at a 45-degree angle like that. The elastic should be on the right side of the fabric, or the pretty side of the seam. Right sides together. Now match up your corners and your seam and pin all the way around, but leave one side open. You start about an inch or so from the edge. You want to have just a tiny bit of seam on each end of the side that you're leaving open. That'll make this a whole lot easier. Then sew a 5/8 seam allowance around the entire edge, but stop an inch on the other side so you have an opening. Alright, everything is sewn, and I've left a gap. You can see that the elastic is tacked down in the corner. Now we trim. Now the corners, I've trimmed just the fabric. Make sure you do not cut the elastic, because if you cut it too short, it's just going to pop right off the edge. So trimming allows it to be a little bit easier to turn inside out, and also reduces bulk. Notice I did not trim at the opening. Look for the next part. Alright, so I've sewn the edges. Now I'm going to turn it inside out. Pull it right through the hole. Now if you pull on the elastic, it should pop that corner right out. Now I just crease the edges with my finger, making sure the seam is as far out as it can be. And I've pinned the loose edges of the opening. Alright, now you're going to take a paper clip, which once again round the edges or else it's going to poke people in the face. I'm just going to slip it through the opening. Now you're just going to have to feel that it's in there evenly, and then bend it. Then it should fit very nicely against this edge. Now pin it to make sure that the paper clip is fully against that edge. And be very careful when you're sewing over this, because if you hit that paper clip, it's not going to be good for your machine. I've also pinned the opening shut. Now top stitch about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. When you get to the part with the paper clip, do about 1/2 of an inch to make sure you're giving that clearance. And there's your finished 2-layer cotton mask. Now as I said, this is for anybody that's got breathing issues or heart issues, or anybody that's going to be wearing like an actual mask underneath. This is very limited filtration. It's better than nothing, but I'll show you how to make a more filtered one next. Now the only difference between a whole filter mask and just the 2-layer is that I have sewn a flannel layer and the non-woven onto the back of one of the pieces of cotton. That's it. That's the only difference. And I repeat the steps like I showed you. Please watch my next part. Alright, so you have your finished full filter mask, which is a lot thicker, and your finished 2-layer mask. Now what? Well, as you probably noticed, the CDC has recommended that every time you go outside, you should wear one of these masks. Now, super important, masks only work if you wear them. I know that sounds silly, but I see a lot of people not actually doing that. As I mentioned before, these full filter masks are very hard to breathe in. Therefore, it's very tempting to pull this down to your nose or off when you're trying to talk, but that completely defeats the purpose of wearing it. If you think you're going to have issues with that, don't even bother with this. Just do a 2-layer one. These are going to be much more comfortable, much easier to breathe in, much easier to talk in, but they have to stay on your face. The reason we put the paper clip in, this top part should be perfectly flush against your face. These sides as well. It's one of the things I've noticed with the accordion style one, the pleated one. They seem to not actually fit on the side of the face. If there's a big hole of air coming in and out, these masks are not effective. So the entire perimeter should be right up against your face perfectly. If it's not, tighten the elastic until it is. But there you go. Now stay safe, everybody.